Hello and welcome to Movie Joust. My name is Jesse Nussman, a film critic living here in Atlanta, Georgia, and with me on the other line, stuffing the money in his duffel bag, it's Josh Sewell. Well, welcome, Josh.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, well, today we have the honor, the privilege of being two white guys talking about the films of Spike Lee.
Finally, our voices can be heard.
The perspective you've all waited to hear. No, I mean, this is like one of the more exciting titles to talk about this summer. We're talking about Highest to Lowest, which is a new thriller starring Denzel Washington that is Washington reuniting with Mr. Spike Lee. One of the great movie director partnerships of our lifetime, certainly. I don't know how you feel, but I certainly feel of my lifetime it's one of the great collaborations. And it's been almost 20 years since they made a movie together, which is kind of crazy.
2006, Inside Man.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is their fifth collaboration. So not as productive a partnership as somebody like a Scorsese and a DiCaprio or a Coogler and a Jordan, but equally, I think, as powerful when it comes to like the legend and reputation of cinema.
Yeah, certainly was a huge partnership in the 1990s and into, I guess Inside Man is 2006, so we can count that in as like early 2000s, basically. So yeah, this is an remake, readaptation, whatever BS word we want to use to basically be like, it's basically Lee doing his own version of High and Low, the beloved Akira Kurosawa movie from the early 60s. Josh, what's your relationship with that movie? Because I remember I saw it in college probably because I took a Kurosawa class.
Nice.
It's one of those movies that's like, I think it's like the third highest rated movie on Letterboxd or something like that. Like it lives up to the hype when, like, if you've never seen it, treat yourself tonight to fire up this movie. It's pretty readily available to stream.
Absolutely. It's on Max right now.
It's on Criterion. There's a 4K Blu-ray of it coming out soon this year. It's one of the great films by one of the like master filmmakers of the 20th century.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I'd seen scenes here and there over the years, but I knew this was coming out, so I revisited it really recently, like earlier this week, just to kind of freshen my recollection of it. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing when it comes to Lee's film, but yeah, it's, we throw the word masterpiece around, especially when it comes to Kurosawa's, I guess, more famous works like your Rashomons or your Seven Samurais. This was, for some reason is considered, maybe sort of like mid-tier Kurosawa or whatever.
Because I feel like I feel like it was for a while, and then weirdly, I think in the last couple years, I don't know whether
like it's a reappreciation or whatever,
right? Or I don't know whether it's just because like it's one of the ones that's just like always available to stream, or like it's a modern crime movie, or modern in quotation mode,
right?
Modern at the time it was coming out, basically. But I feel like in the last couple of years, it has bumped up, even from like when I saw it for the first time, from like, as you said, kind of in that mid-tier of his work to like now it's like this and Seven Samurai and Ron and like Akiru, like it's in the top tier now, I feel like.
Well, fair for me, because like I said, it's like, it's like a literal masterpiece, so there's like not really anything that you can be like, why is it not more blood? And I don't know if it's just maybe samurai bias or something. I think people like Kurosawa's sort of like epics, historical epics better. This one is just like, you go back and watch it, you see that it is foundational in the genre. Like what we know about police procedurals, we don't have a Zodiac without High and Low. We probably don't have Law and Order without High and Low. There's a lot of just the nitty gritty of police work details. And one of the things that, and this might be a good segue into the Lee version, is
Mm-hmm.
you have a legendary Japanese filmmaker adapting an American crime novel. It was based
Mm-hmm.
on an Ed McBain book from his 57th Precinct series that has like 4,000 entries or whatever, and takes a distinctly American novel and instills, the anxieties and fears of the modern Japanese era at the time, which was, couple of decades removed from being nuked, in a war.
Yeah, it's
And it really does communicate strictly Japanese fears, anxieties, themes that still manage to translate to international audiences. Whereas Lee's interpretation of this, I think they're calling it a remix rather than a remake.
a
Um,
fun Spike Lee way of saying it's a
sure,
remake.
but this is a 100% distilled, undiluted Spike Lee movie. This is as American as American movies get, specifically a New York film. This is a New York film shot in New York, New York running through its veins for the whole 2 hour and 15 minute running time.
Yeah, so I guess just to give listeners an idea on what the story is for both of these movies, and I like what you said. I mean, the last thing I'll say about the Kurosawa version is it is just this like perfect collision of like Toshiro Mifune giving this like one of the great on-screen actors giving a very complex and interesting performance inside of a movie that is kind of like technically audacious in terms of like what it is doing with like blocking and like how people
Yeah.
are sort of positioned within the frame. Like I have to imagine this movie is like a huge influence on like the Wes Andersons of the world that are so obsessed with kind of like perfectly curating like where people are in the frame,
Production design and that kind of thing.
yes. And then, as you said, there's this whole like, socio-political aspect to the movie of, about Japan sort of transitioning out of post-war into a more, Western capitalist society, and the people who rise in that society and the people who fall. Lee's version, which, puts Denzel Washington in the Toshiro Mifune role and makes him a music mogul instead of I believe he's like a businessman.
Shoemaker. Yeah, shoemaker guy.
a
For
shoe
a huge
factory owner.
corporation. He's not in like a cottage assembling it with a hammer. Like he works for like this
No.
huge national corporation,
Yeah, he's like the head of like Marshalls. He's not like a little cobbler.
Yeah, exactly.
in the town. But I feel like Lee's version, which I'm interested to talk about the ways in which it's kind of different than the Kurosawa version, because I think it is a more weirdly upbeat movie than the Kurosawa version.
Absolutely.
Is like has a more like uplifting ending than that movie does, but is really, I think, to me, a movie about legacy and about Lee and Washington, which I'm excited to talk about both of their careers in the context of this movie, are both very, very successful artists who are late in life or like entering their later stage in life.
They're sort of like in a perfect world would be sort of like retirement sunset years, right? If it wasn't for hustle culture,
Yeah, and I think at least for, Washington, I feel like has been very candid about like he's thinking about these things and like, all the interviews he gave and sort of the press tour for the Gladiator movie. And I have to imagine Lee as well. This is a movie about like what happens when you're a quote unquote artist who gets to a certain level of fame and success in your later years. And then you're sort of like, what do I do with this money and this success that I have accumulated? And what is my responsibility to my family, to my professional life, to other artists who are maybe striving in the same ways that I was striving earlier in my career? And I think to kind of transition us into now talking about the Lee movie, I think it doesn't really work so much as a thriller, I thought, but as a sort of, I guess, moral dilemma drama about, you know, someone in that sort of ivory tower state and trying to think of like, what do I do with all this money? And thinking about Washington and Lee at this point in their life. I don't know. It's a fascinating meta text, and I'm really excited to talk about the Washington performance, which I was just like, I can watch this guy like order Chinese food or like read them, like make a grocery list. Like I think there's so much joy to be had in this movie of just watching Washington do this meaty of a role, even if there are some other clunkier aspects of the movie that we can kind of get into.
Yeah, it is really fascinating to look at the roles he's choosing lately. It's that he did Macbeth, which is, a ruler, somebody striving for the throne and being corrupted. He did he did Gladiator 2, which is about someone striving for the throne and being corrupted.
Just wrapped up Othello on Broadway, where like I was in New York earlier this summer, and it was just like that was everywhere. It was just like, get your tickets now, Denzel, Broadway.
Yeah, and so and even with this one, it is about someone who has reached the top in whatever path they are achieving, and it's not so much about the in the Kurosawa version, it's very much, you can tell that that's where Bong Joon-ho got a lot of Parasite. It's a lot of class stuff. It's a lot of, people looking up at people literally on high, right? Where the character lives in a mansion on top of a mountain that people can see from the slums. Not quite as much of that in Highest to Lowest. It's more like Denzel has reached the top and has forgotten what it means to be hungry. And so you have people who are striving to be artists in a culture that doesn't respect or value art, and you have to take increasingly desperate methods to be noticed. And there's a lot of meditation on TikTok in here. There's a lot of meditation on YouTube and what it means to break through now versus when artists like Spike Lee and Denzel were coming up. It's an entirely new system with entirely new ways to break through, and you can tell that Lee's got a lot of stuff to say about that.
Yeah, and a lot of, taking that idea that you mentioned of the first movie, which I should probably finish explaining what the plot was. I got somewhat distracted. But I mean, basically, this rich businessman in both movies learns that, I think to kind of avoid too much spoilers, I would say, learns that his son has been kidnapped, and is all about sort of and it was being held for ransom, and about the sort of moral quandary of like, how much of my professional life am I willing to sort of put on the line for my family, for other people who may be in danger. And yeah, this movie even kind of like weirdly modernizes that idea that you mentioned from the first movie of like, you can see the Toshiro Mifune character's house from the slums, and this idea of like, well, you don't even need to do that anymore. You can just get on social media and see, the idea of like, we're constantly like bombarded by, whether it's real wealth or not, or real success or not, sort of this idea of like influencer culture and people around you in the online space that you can, be jealous of and have beef with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, who needs a telescope to spy when you've got Zillow? You can just look and see the inside of people's houses without setting up spy cameras or whatever.
Right,
but,
right.
So yeah, it's, to kind of remind people of some other intricacies of the plot without getting into spoilers. So, Washington plays David King, who at one point had the best ears in the business, right? And his the record label that he co-founded is about to be absorbed by venture capitalists, which is, ruins every company it touches, right? And so he's like, okay, I'm about to get rich, but what is that going to do with this art that I've spent decades, building and cultivating, he jokes they're going to put it in like tampon and Viagra commercials, these songs that were about something. And so he works out a plan to buy out the majority of the shares, but he has to leverage everything in his life within an inch of its life, right? So essentially, if this doesn't work, he's going to go broke. So he's got the money, but right when he gets the money, like you said, he gets word that his son has been kidnapped. So now it's literally business or family. What's this going to be? He's a dad. Obviously, even for somebody as business savvy as Washington's character, you know what the answer is going to be. But then stuff happens that complicates that answer.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, what if miraculously I got off the hook for that, but other things happen that would cause me to lose money? Now is it still worth giving up that money? And
right.
It
kind of keeps it keeps sort of pivoting what the stakes are of like what you initially think is sort of like your family's life or your wealth. The things on either side of that, it becomes, even choices of like, what if it's someone else not in your family? What if, everyone's fine, but maybe you're not going to be able to get the money back, and what is at stake then? And then like, what if you can get control back of this company? Like, what is that something that you even want to have? I don't know that quite makes for like the most engaging thriller, but it weirdly, like, it makes for some interesting dramatic stuff for Washington to work with. And I just have to like, he's the greatest on-screen actor living currently. Like,
wait, absolutely one of them, and in the top tier, if not the best.
Yeah, and just sort of like, he's so kind of effortlessly great at this point. There's something even like in like interviews with him these days, he's just so like relaxed and kind of comfortable in his skin, and you can tell throughout this movie that him and Lee have such a like comfort with each other and a familiarity with each other that Denzel is allowed to be, I feel like, a little looser here, and a little bit more like having a little bit more fun, and it feels comfortable and feels willing to just sort of like enjoy chewing on all of this material here in a way that I found like electrifying to watch. I don't, what do you think about him in this movie?
Yeah, agree. And what you said is remarkable considering they haven't worked together in 19 years, but they still pick up, and it feels like they have a shorthand together. Spike Lee has said in interviews, like, they're not besties, they're not, buddies or anything, but their families are still incredibly close. He worked with Denzel's son John David and Black Klansman. Their wives are very tight, and so like they've run in the same circles for so long that you probably just develop a sort of cultural shorthand through that. Right. And so they work in the same fields of art. They speak the same sort of cinematic language. So not to assume anything, but it feels like those are relatively easier days on set where you can just say, hey, maybe this, or speak in a couple of words instead of giving full sentences of directions. But this is a man who is, if he's not been in every Spike Lee movie, has certainly seen his entire field of work, and knows the kind of movies he makes. Lee is one of the most visually engaging and unsubtle, in the best way, directors that we have. So like, when you're watching a Spike Lee,
he's a true maximalist of like, there's almost no such thing as subtext in a Spike Lee movie. And even I'm curious, what's your relationship with Lee, because he's someone who, like, The Highs are some of my like favorite movies ever made. I kind of definitely want to like, touch on the other movies he made with Denzel at the end of our conversation. But, even when I don't quite gel with his movies, they're still interesting. Like, I never like
Yeah,
walk
yeah,
out of
yeah.
a Spike Lee movie being like the guy doesn't sell out. You know what I
No,
mean?
no, no, no.
Like
Even
he's
even
always
when he's
doing a big swing, and I admire that and look forward to all of his movies. Even when there's kind of like, there's a handful that are great, there's a handful that are, I still personally enjoy despite maybe some of their faults, and then there's, a small handful where I'm like, whoa, that definitely didn't work, but I'm glad you went for it, my dude.
yeah, you've got stuff like my brain just died and I don't know what I was going to say. But yeah, he's got a handful of movies that you're like, that was a spectacular garbage fire, but it sure was fun to look at.
Yeah.
And very rarely does he have a movie that just makes you scratch your head going like, what was your thinking behind that? The only one I can really
Yeah.
think of, which made me nervous when I heard about this, was his Old Boy remake. And I was like,
Yes.
I'm not sure what the calculations were there. Was that one of your only pure
I think
paycheck choices, or
he is kind of even leaned on that he like had to make some compromises with
yeah,
it being notable that is the one film of his that is not referred to as a Spike Lee joint. I think is the one movie of his
interesting.
that he does not have a particularly fond memory of making, I believe.
Fair enough. So, and it feels like he's really leaning into that with Highest to Lowest, where he's taken sort
Mhm.
of all the baggage that comes along with the first time he tried to do something like this, and has made a movie that, even if, doesn't quite work as well as the original, it's definitely a really solid, interesting, smart piece of storytelling with a lot of stuff to say, and which makes sense the kind of filmmaker Spike Lee is, because I came to him as a teenager
Same.
when I probably watched way more movies and didn't understand them till later, because I didn't have the historical or cultural context to understand the points he was making, the graffiti on the wall and Do the Right Thing. This was
Mhm.
pre-Wikipedia, where you didn't have just like quick bullet point explanations for this stuff. And so to have those movies just sort of live and swim around in your brain, Do the Right Thing. I know it's cliche to talk about that, but it literally is going to be the first line of his obituary.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
if he like didn't make any other movies, like
yeah.
that's still like that's one of the like landmark American
You
movies of
still
the
made
the
one of the greatest movies of all time. And
right.
to have a movie that came out almost 40 years ago now, and other than a couple of pop cultural references, is just as vital and sadly relevant as it was in 89, you really do have your finger on the pulse of a lot of the issues and anxieties plaguing America, and you see a through line of that through all of his work, even into Highest to Lowest. So even when he's in serious filmmaker mode, he's got this really sly and subversive sense of humor. He's
Mhm.
really good at for better or worse, for kind of like picking at scabs when people are like, just leave the band-aid on, dude. And he's like, no, 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 we're gonna
But
dig around in
but
this.
I love that about him.
Yeah,
That's so
absolutely.
and like the thing I was thinking about the other night in sort of, walking out of this movie is the ways in which like, you know, I feel like if you're a fan or an admirer of Spike Lee's movies, maybe this is a little bit of a me on the therapy couch of me watching his movies, but there is kind of a give and take. I think you have to make as an audience member of sometimes a kind of coherence for and maybe a sort of messiness that you have to sort of like accept, but for I guess what I'm trying to say is like he has his fetishes and his idiosyncrasies and the things he likes to return to and explore, and sometimes that gets in the way of the movie just as like an engine of entertainment, and can kind of
Uh-huh.
make the movie feel overwhelmed. But yet there's also a give and take of sort of being like, for example, in this movie, I don't I don't know that I want to take away like the the basketball humor up against like
Yeah.
the Boston Celtics. That's such a great
Oh, that
like
was so
Lee,
funny. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
great like Lee thing of being like I mean the guy is like a huge like New York sports guy, and I love that he like wants to flex that in his movies. Or there are aspects of this movie where it does feel like sometimes in his movies, it feels like we've grind to a halt for Lee to like get on a soapbox and talk about whatever local or national political topic he feels he needs to speak on at the moment. But I don't think he's not ever really in the wrong about what he wants to talk about. And it's that fascinating trade-off of sort of like sometimes the things that kind of can be bumps in the storytelling are sort of the fun bits of personality in his movies that the more you see another one of our Atlanta Film Critics fellows Jay Ledbetter and I went and saw this was a couple months ago, went and saw Bamboozled. It was playing in theaters, a movie that was not very well received at the time, and even when I first saw it, I think when I was in college, I was like, I kind of don't get it, and like why does this look ugly? And saw it in a packed theater and like came out and was like, that's one of his best movies, and
it
that
absolutely
is so like he was so had his finger like on the pulse of so many like cultural topics and issues that we just as a society, I guess, were too afraid to talk about in 2000 or 2001 when that movie was coming out.
And we didn't have the media literacy at the time that we did later. This movie essentially comes about a year or two too early. Like, it's sort of like the Unbreakable just missing the superhero movement.
Yeah,
Bamboozled, if it had opened when reality TV exploded a couple of years later, it would have made way more sense to way more people, but Spike Lee is just smarter and more visionary than everybody else, so he was early.
and was so ahead of like, we need to be talking about like, the ways that Black people in this country are sort of represented in media and what the history of that has been and how it still continues in sort of these weird like microaggressive ways, and doing it in this over the top satire where it was just sort of like, this is stuff that like people in like 2020 were like topics of conversation, and here's Spike Lee in like 2000. So that I mean, that's like a perfect example I think of a movie that like when it came out, people were like, this is a mess, and he just seems like he's mad about a bunch of stuff, and like he kind of can't make a coherent movie. And now you go back and rewatch it and you're like, oh my god, he was so ahead of the curve and so fun. Like there are just so many moments in that movie that are like, especially like the Tommy Hilfiger bit. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to try and repeat it.
No, not on this podcast.
Uproarious laughter in the theater of like a very like multiracial like audience seeing that movie at the Plaza here in Atlanta, and being like everyone knowing what the joke of that scene is, and being like, this man like was unafraid to just sort of like to go to the jugular of that.
And to kind of still talk about this, but bring it back to highest to lowest.
Yes,
again,
please,
it shows the Jeffrey Wright of it all, right? Like 20 years later, Jeffrey Wright's in a movie that wins an Oscar for screenplay that addresses a lot of the same stuff as Bamboozled did, and gets a Best Picture nomination, gets a Best Actor nomination. So Spike Lee is like, I was doing that, and so
I want you to talk about the Jeffrey Wright element, because you dropped a pretty hot take.
It's my hot take.
In our text message that, I mean, Jeffrey Wright, I should say, plays the Denzel Washington character's driver, who not to give anything away, but if you've seen the Kurosawa movie, how
the
that
part he
character
plays,
the part he plays. But I would say to someone who has seen neither version, probably like the second most important character in the movie, I
Yeah.
would say.
And so and Jeffrey Wright is coming from a place. Jeffrey Wright's character is coming from a place in life far different than Denzel Washington's character. He is someone who is still connected to, you know, to be cliche, the streets or the real world, and sort of has his head in a more realistic place than Washington's character has over the last couple of decades or so. And so there's a clear dichotomy, a clear difference in the way these two characters react to really bad things happening to their characters. Just the intentions of the film are to show you these two very different characters, and it's also to show you that perhaps Washington's character has gotten to his place in life where he is by having to shave some of those edges off of himself. He thinks of himself strong, powerful, black man, and he is, but to get to the top of the business world, Lee's saying in America today, you can't come across as someone who is going to be, profiled in a boardroom. Right.
You need to do a little bit of code switching, I guess.
Yes,
would be the
Wright's character doesn't have that problem, and you can really see the difference in the two in some of the most fascinating parts of the film for me in how these two characters interact with the police.
Yes.
And it's a Spike Lee movie, so of course the police are... There's a reason that one of them is played by the Mayhem insurance guy, right? That is Lee doing intentionally... He's poking the bear. Like, he's like, here's the role the cops play in this movie. Like, there is a role they have to play in our society, but we all know how that role works, even if we don't want to admit that we do. And so the way they interact with Wright's character when he suddenly becomes more important to the investigation than Washington's character, both because of who he is, the way he treats them, and the money he doesn't have compared to Washington's character, you see that the cops are way less deferential to him, way more condescending to him. And so for me, as amazing as Washington is in this film, like, it's impossible for him not to be amazing. Even in a mediocre movie like Gladiator 2, he's still by far the best thing about the movie. It's the only thing that makes a movie worth watching, really. But
and it becomes the issue of that movie, as we've sort of joked about like a billion times. If you get to the end and you're like, I'm on Denzel's side. That the guy's making good points.
And so as fascinating and amazing as Denzel's character is in Highest to Lowest, I think Jeffrey Wright's character, Paul, is the more interesting character.
Okay.
And it's because Wright, I would argue, just as good an actor as Denzel Washington, hasn't had the success that he's had.
Yeah.
But he also doesn't have the cultural baggage that Denzel has.
Yeah.
We don't call Jeffrey Wright Jeffrey, right? We call Denzel Denzel. They're both incredible actors. And so for me, part of the price of admission when you hire Denzel to play your lead, or when Denzel hires you as the director to film his lead, which is what the case was with Highest to Lowest, when Washington brought Spike Lee on. There are certain things that a character played by Denzel Washington can and can't do that a character played by Jeffrey Wright he's got more freedom, I guess.
Yeah,
and
there's not the star image to necessarily uphold.
And
with
so
Washington.
In the back half of this film, it's a weird feeling, because to me, the second half works better than the first half, because that's when Lee stops being quite as married to the original film, right? The second half of the film plays out in a much different way than the first half, which hits pretty much the same beats as Kurosawa's film. But to make those things go differently, Spike Lee kind of has to let Denzel off the leash and let him do Denzel things, which was antithetical to the part that Mifune is playing in the first film. He kind of disappears.
I was just about to say, I was shocked rewatching it. I rewatched it earlier this week, same as you, and I had basically totally forgot that oh wait, the second half of the movie basically just then turns into I mean, I don't say this like dismissively, like
Yeah.
it's an like exhilarating second half of the movie, but like Mifune and that character basically like disappears, and it becomes basically like totally focused on the cops trying
Right.
to track down the kidnapper.
Yeah, and and the first half of a Kurosawa's movie essentially takes place in the apartment.
Right,
The first
it's
hour
all
of that
one
movie
room.
is in
Yeah.
one room or one, unit at least. It may go to
Mhm.
different rooms, but it's in the same apartment. And then the second half really opens up the world of it's Tokyo, right?
Yeah, it's Tokyo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Spike Lee's not going to sit still with a camera.
No,
And so
no.
this is a very vivid, alive movie. It's a frenetic movie. It's a chaotic movie from the first moments. Kurosawa is very much a reserved filmmaker. Lee
Yes.
is not that, and so
Right.
it really opens the door to different settings, situations. Like I said, it's a very New York film. This is not Vancouver pretending to be New York or Toronto.
No, but I sort of
oh,
love
to get
that,
back
and
to
that. Yeah.
sorry,
Yep.
to get back to the right part. The hot
Yeah.
take was, because he doesn't have the baggage that comes with Denzel, I was like, hot take, I think this movie is better if Jeffrey Wright is in the Denzel role. It's a much different movie. It's probably not the movie that Lee wants to make. Certainly not the movie Washington wants to make. But I think it's a more interesting movie. The one we get is still great.
That is,
like
that is crazy to me. But then again, that's someone who is just sort of like the entire time watching this, I was just like, I love Denzel Washington.
Yeah,
just
same here.
Like,
that's what I was saying. I'm no critique or criticism.
Time I was like, I was just like, I am going to like. I mean, he's not that old, so like, I hope he lives a long, prosperous life. But of like, I was just sort of like, oh my god, when he goes, I'm gonna like feel destroyed inside.
I mean, he's 70, like, man. He's 70 years old. He just doesn't look it, but it's
still,
crazy.
He's still, he's so like energetic and like, I don't know. But I loved what you brought up about the New Yorkness of this, and it made me think of another moment in the movie where I was kind of like, I don't know that we necessarily need this, or this kind of like drags down or feels sort of like a weird digression in the movie, which is like the whole like Puerto Rican celebration sequence. Yeah. But like that's another Spike Lee element, which is like Spike Lee is such a like, he understands New York and gets, it's like that great moment in the 25th Hour movie of like the mirror scene that begins as sort of a like pretty racist tirade towards different subgroups in New York, but then becomes this like loving reflection of how like diverse and unique that city is. And that whole Puerto Rican celebration sequence with Rosie Perez like shows up at one moment, and I like
as Rosie Perez,
stand up in the theater,
which is another aspect of Lee's work that he brings here, which is his fictional world butting up against our real world. Like Rick Fox plays Rick Fox in this movie. Like that's something Lee's done his whole career. You have like real life people interacting with fictional characters.
New York personalities and New York specific stuff, and again, I agree with you. I some of that stuff may get in the way of the movie for some people, and it does kind of drag it in a certain places, but it's part of that Spike Lee character that you get, and it's part of the special sauce of his movies.
It's also the most interesting part of the movie. The train, like the ransom drop, which takes place amid the chaos and celebration of this parade, is by far, to me at least, the best 20-25 minutes of the movie. And which kind of mirrors the original. The train sequence in the original is fantastic. Obviously in Lee's movie it's going to be a subway, because it's in New York. And it's really interesting to have the traditional Spike Lee trademarks show up in a film that has such a heightened movie world premise. You still have the jump cuts. You see people hug and dap like the
Yeah.
same shot like 2 or 3 times, like spliced together, which
Yeah.
is meant to be intentionally jarring. You also have the usual Lee thing of characters speaking directly to the camera.
Yeah.
You have, and all of that stuff is happening in a traditional, police procedural that elevates it above. When Kurosawa made High and Low, you didn't have 4 million cop movies and 2,000 police shows. Like all
Yeah.
of this stuff that's become standard and cliche to us now. Lee knows to put a spin on that he's not going to make a normal boring cop drama. And
Yeah.
so he's adding those pieces of his own life, expertise, knowledge, personality to it, and it makes the movie all the better for it. Not in every aspect. I have some questions about some of his casting choices.
Yeah. There's one I definitely want to ask you about, which
Ooh.
may not be the one that you're thinking of, though I do want to let you off the leash for the one that maybe you are thinking of. I do want to ask you about ASAP Rocky, who
Yeah.
plays the kidnapper in the movie, and like I thought was great. Like
He's fantastic.
I was like sometimes you never know when with like a musician being cast in a role, but like he worked for that part. And there's there's a scene. My favorite scene in the movie is like him and like Denzel confronting him at a recording studio, and these two men who both have this love for music but are like see the music industry in different ways and sort of going back and forth in this booth and sort of jousting with similar to this podcast, jousting with each other.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, it's essentially a rap battle. You get to see Denzel do a rap battle.
Yeah.
Price of admission right there,
Yeah. So I know there's someone else that you want to talk about.
So yeah, it's kind of baffling to me, and maybe it's just because I'm unfamiliar with this actress. Maybe it's because I don't understand some of the intentions of the casting, and I always feel like a jerk for, I always feel like a jerk criticizing as a critic, but like there's an actress by the name of Ilfinish Hadera who plays Denzel Washington character's wife, who might be the most miscast actor I've seen in a film in a long time.
Interesting. I sort of like didn't mind her in the movie, while definitely like she's probably like one of the weaker links in the cast, considering like how good like Wright and Denzel and some of the other just sort of like Spike Lee great character actors kind of coming in are.
Yeah, and and I don't want to make it, I was gonna say I don't want to sound like I'm just being a jerk for no reason, but like I'm unfamiliar with her work. She has worked with Lee several other times. She was on She's Got to Have It TV show that he did. She was an Old Boy. She's been in a couple of other of his films too. So maybe they just have a really good working relationship together. But you can't have her be the matriarch of this powerful family and put her in scenes with Denzel Washington. You just cannot. She gets blown off the screen every time.
There is kind of a power imbalance of like, I wonder what it would have been like if you had like Angela Bassett or someone like that in this role that could really sort of like lock horns with him, and you really could feel as sort of the other part of that power couple, like you said.
Right, yeah, it's just, I mean, like, if I'm being blunt, it's just like so much of the story revolves around her being an influential voice in her husband's life, as a partner in this, personal relationship as well as his business relationship. She has this monologue about how she's no longer going to be a silent partner, which I'm sure on paper is super powerful. I never could buy her as an influential presence in his world.
Yeah.
Even like I even bought, like there's a scene he has with the actor who plays his son, where the actor playing his son, just gets this devastating gut punch of a killer line. That Washington's
that's another one
character
of the great scenes.
Exits on, and that scene which is like Washington's character speaking to his son, someone he loves, but clearly is never going to view as an equal, just
Yeah.
completely obliterating his father.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same movie where the wife character who King clearly views as a partner just doesn't have partner presence.
Mm-hmm.
And not to get into the weeds about this, but I looked at, I was like, who is this actress? I don't want to feel like I'm like kicking a puppy or something, and
Mm-hmm.
she's born in 1985. She's
Mm-hmm.
younger than me, playing Denzel's wife when he's
Mm-hmm.
70. And, not to say that, oh my God, rich, powerful men have younger wives. That's never happened ever in the history of the world. But it it really does add this bizarre feeling to the scenes. I mean, it's like she's yelling or talking to her dad or her grandpa.
Yeah, they definitely don't have very much chemistry together.
No.
I would agree with that. And their scenes are some of the ones that do fall kind of flat in the movie for me.
Her reaction to hearing that her son has been kidnapped
Mm-hmm.
is like, oh, the DoorDash guy forgot your breadsticks. Like, and I don't, and again, it's like we'll move on because I just feel bad
Yeah,
doing this, but like,
we're almost out of time.
yeah, it's and part of this is just this modern generation of actresses who have eliminated all use of facial expression through makeup and
Mm-hmm.
injections, and like, you can't have worry lines if Botox has eliminated your worry lines.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which, when you look at literally every other actress in the film, they're incredible. Ice Spice shows up for one
Yeah.
scene and
Yeah.
is fantastic. I know nothing about Ice Spice. Clearly, a 44-year-old man is not Ice Spice's target demo. She's really good in what is essentially a throwaway scene. The actress at the end of the film, when this turns into like a musical, for no better sense of the word, which it kind of
Yeah.
hints at. The movie opens with "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning" from Oklahoma, which
Yes.
I loved. But the actress who plays such a huge role in the final scene, like, she goes from you being like, who is this, to, oh my God, this is one of the greatest final scenes of the year.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really, really powerful moment. So it was just uh, baffling to me that someone who could cast these actresses in seemingly minor roles kind of dropped the ball with casting what is essentially the most important female character in the film.
So let's close out by let's maybe give one other personal recommendation of the Spike Denzel oeuvre. That, as we said, this is their fifth movie together. Probably on first viewing, I think this is my least favorite of their collaborations together.
I could
I
see
think
that.
I
I think
think
it
this
needs
is
time
kind
to
of it.
grow.
Yeah, I think this is kind of in sort of like the mid tier of Spike Lee movies for me, of like
I would agree with that.
fun, enjoyable. I think this movie's going straight to Apple TV Plus, even though, if you're trying to, I don't know, that kind of doesn't make sense to me from a business standpoint of like, it's a crime
Yeah.
movie with Denzel Washington. People will show up for that.
Yeah,
But
it's playing
anyway,
in
of like,
Atlanta. It's playing in Atlanta now for a few weeks, and then I think it hits Apple earlier mid-September.
yeah, but I think as like a streaming movie, it is a fun, fired up on a Thursday night, and
Yeah.
you will be plenty entertained. Even though I would say it doesn't reach the heights of the Kurosawa movie, as well as is probably like mid tier of in the Spike Lee filmography for me. But there are other four collaborations. There's obviously Mo Better Blues from
Hmm.
1990, sort of another musical romantic drama with Denzel as a very 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 sexy trumpet player. Maybe Denzel as like the sexiest he's ever been in a movie. I've had many friends who have said like that was a very special movie for their moms when it came out. And then obviously Malcolm X, which is one of the totemic American movies of the 1990s. And then you got He Got Game in 1998, another sports drama from Lee, and then you have Inside Man in 2006. What would be your, if you had to offer up kind of like one suggestion to the listeners of, in the spirit of this episode, kind of a Spike Denzel collaboration, or maybe it could just be a Spike joint that, you would recommend people checking out?
So, I mean, it's the most obvious cliched answer, but if you haven't seen Malcolm X, it literally is one of the greatest / most important movies of the 20th century.
You'll be like, wait, Denzel won Best Actor for that, right? And then you'll be like, wait, no, he lost to Al Pacino. Was that maybe like what year is that? Was that like Godfather 3 or something like? Well, the Sin of a Woman. What?
Exactly. Yeah. Denzel as Malcolm X lost to Hua. And I get that it was a gimme Oscar, it was a makeup Oscar, but
he's
still
bad in that movie. That movie is awful.
But so
Woman is awful.
If you haven't seen Malcolm X, I know before I said "Do the Right Thing" is going to be like the first line of Spike Lee's obit. Malcolm X is going to be the second line.
It's a pretty undeniable movie.
It's both of them operating at the peak of their powers. Like, highest to lowest is retirement age Denzel and Spike Lee making a still good movie. Mm-hmm. Imagine peak Lee and peak Washington making one of the most important movies ever. And that's what Malcolm X
essentially
is.
Like their Lee's version of Lawrence of Arabia, like a sweeping 3.5-hour historical epic that is like totally engrossing from start to finish.
I mean, and you hear 3.5 hours and you're like, ugh, like it feels like an hour. Like it's so propulsive. It's so like every face in the movie was either a recognizable face or went on to be a very recognizable face later.
It's
just
a rare
stacked.
biopic from like that's cradle to grave that kind of that like really works. That's like pretty much that's like 9 times out of 10 like a death sentence in my view for a biopic, because you're trying to cram so much in, but the movie is both so long and gives all that so much time to breathe, as well as it gives Denzel so many different flavors to play with, because it gets to like explore Malcolm X from so many different aspects of his life. The one I'm gonna give a shout out to, if you've not seen He Got Game, the sports drama,
that was gonna be my honorable mention.
Another like Spike one of like there's there's some subplots, and like the whole subplot with like Denzel falling in love with like is it like Mila Jovovich is the prostitute, is like we can maybe get rid of that, but probably one of my favorite Denzel performances, a movie that is another example, kind of like Bamboozled, of like, oh, we sort of like wrote this off at the time, but Lee was like so ahead of the curve on like so many conversations around kind of like the machinery of the college athlete experience, and how those programs sometimes, I know there's some that are wonderful, but then other ways in which they sort of like prey on young athletes in the way that like young athletes sometimes get chewed up and spat out in the sort of pro college level. Just like a really interesting movie. And like, I really do think like maybe Denzel's most underrated performance. Like he's really good, off the charts great in that movie as like a father who gets told that he can get out of jail early if he can convince his estranged son to play for like the prison warden's alma mater in basketball, and his son is like the number 1 recruit in the country. And so it's this, really complex like father-son drama that is also Lee, firing shots at, as we said, the sort of like machinery of kind of like modern day sort of star athlete building, and the way that it sort of preys on some young men.
And as a bonus in our era of never-ending nostalgia, it's one of the most 90s movies to ever 90.
Yeah.
Like, so if you are loving that the 90s aesthetic is sort of making a comeback, have I got a treat for you.
Yeah. Well, Josh, this has been fun. I'm sure we will hopefully get more opportunities to talk about Spike Lee in the future. In the next few weeks, I think we're gonna talk about Caught Stealing, the new Darren Aronofsky movie. We're gonna talk about The Roses, maybe.
Yeah,
Which,
we've got half a Coen Brothers movie coming up.
oh, that's true. That's going to be a really interesting episode. So yeah, a lot of great stuff to look forward to. If you haven't already, be sure to like, review, and subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, so you don't miss out on a great episode. And Josh, we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, see you then.